What's going on, guys? Jake Peffer here. Welcome back to Jake's Cinema Room. Today is October 13th, 2023, Friday the 13th. No better day than to take a look at the entirety of the Friday the 13th franchise. In this video, I'm going to give you guys my overall thoughts on the series and rank all 12 movies from worst to best. Now, my experience with this series has been kind of an up and down roller coaster for the most part. Out of the three big horror franchises, this, Halloween, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, for the longest time, this one was always kind of my least favorite. Never was really a big fan of Jason, and a lot of the movies kind of felt very similar over the years. But as I've watched them more and more, I've grown to like the series a lot more than I did when I first saw it. Jason is a little bit better of a character than I originally thought. Granted, he doesn't do a whole lot besides just kill people. But he also isn't quite as annoying as Freddy Krueger, even though I do like that particular character. He keeps to himself, which is nice. And this is a series that definitely has some very good highs, but also some very low lows as well. I'm just going to run through all 12 movies, let you know what I think of each one, and how I'd rank them from worst to best. So, starting out at number 12, I have Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, the 9th movie in the series. This one is, without question, the weirdest one in the entire franchise, to say the least. This is one of the few that doesn't actually really feature Jason at all. Yeah, he's in it at the beginning, but then the FBI basically makes him explode, and then he shows up again at the end. But in this movie, we find out that he, for this entire time, has been this little creature from hell that basically just takes over whatever human body he wants, and then that body then absorbs all the powers of Jason and can do whatever he wants, essentially. And then it introduces all this weird backstory where Jason can only be killed by a relative, and then for some reason he has relatives in these movies, even though before this we've only met his mother. So not sure why they decided to go that route. But yeah, I mean, this was the first movie that New Line put out after they acquired the rights from Paramount. And it's a rough movie, to say the least. I mean, just the entire thing of taking away Jason and turning him into this creature that just, jumps into body after body after body and goes around killing people. It's pretty dumb, to say the least. There's not a whole lot here to really enjoy. There's some decent gore and a few okay kills here and there. I will give credit to the character of Creighton Duke. He's actually a pretty awesome character. Outside of that, though, you really don't have much going on. They take away the best part of these movies, which is Jason. So you do have Kane Hodder, who played Jason more than anybody else in this series, returning in the role, but, you're limiting his screen time because the majority of the movie, he's just this dumb hell creature that nobody cares about. Why they decided to go this route, I have no idea. But in the end, it gives us what is without a doubt the worst movie in this series. Moving on to number 11, I have Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. This is another one that just does not work on any level for the most part. For one, he doesn't really take over Manhattan. It takes over an hour, almost the entirety of the movie, before we even get to New York. And of course, this movie was shot mostly in Canada, so you have some establishing shots of New York. But once our characters actually get there, there's really not a whole lot of New York that they're going around to. We basically spend the entire movie on a boat that is like it's a field trip or like a send-off for these kids that are about to graduate, and why they're taking a boat from Crystal Lake over to New York, Beyond Me or whatever. But it's just all around kind of a weird movie. It introduces some stuff that I am not a big fan of, like the main girl seeing like little Jason, her having little glimpses of him, the entire ending with him basically getting murdered by toxic waste in an alley and then turning back into his child self again. Very weird. This one overall, you know, it's got some okay kills. All the characters are pretty much throwaway, forgettable characters. There's nothing too redeeming here. You do get a pretty awesome rooftop boxing match between the character of Julius and Jason that ends with one of the best deaths in the series by far. But really, outside of that, there's not much else to like here. And unfortunately, this is an entry that just doesn't do a whole lot. Moving on to number 10, I have Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. Now, this is one that definitely made the fans mad back when it came out, because this is another movie that doesn't feature Jason. This one literally doesn't feature Jason, because in the end, the killer was Roy. Paramedic Roy. Yeah. What were they thinking with this one? Because it's like, you take away, again, the best, arguably the best part of the series, Jason, and then you have this copycat killer that's supposed to be Jason, but it ends up being this paramedic whose son gets murdered at the beginning of the movie, who we have no notion of this being his son. We barely see this character before he, eventually gets revealed as the killer. And it's just like, what were you doing with this? None of this works. You have the character of Tommy Jarvis coming back, this time not played by Corey Feldman. He's played by an older actor, so they age him up a bit. And this guy, he's okay. He barely has any lines in the movie, because throughout the movie he's basically just quiet. And he gets sent to what is essentially a halfway house where he's trying to better himself after, being traumatized by what happens in the events of Part 4. And, we meet a cast of characters that are all just dead meats. And, we find out that Jason isn't really Jason. And then they try to flip it around and make it to where Tommy Jarvis is maybe going to become Jason at the end. Pretty stupid. I'm not a big fan of it. I know there are some fans of this entry, and if you like it, totally fine. But this one doesn't really do anything for me. The only saving graces here are you have the kid, Reggie the Reckless. I think he's actually one of the better parts of the movie. And then his brother, Demon, played by Miguel A. Nunez Jr., Juana Man himself. His small part is pretty funny, and him singing on the toilet is without a doubt one of the best parts of this series by far. This one does have a few pretty good kills for the most part, but all in all, there's just not enough here to really enjoy or that's that entertaining. And unfortunately, it's in the bottom 3 for that reason. Moving on to number 9. This may be a little bit of a controversial pick here, but I have Friday the 13th, Part 3. Yes, I know this is the one where he gets the hockey mask. Yeah, this is the one in 3D. But there's really not much going on in this entry. This one, to me, is very boring. It's one of the few in the series that, while I'm watching it, there's a few things here and there to enjoy. But all in all, this one just feels like it's taking the longest to kind of get going. And there's just not really much here, honestly. You have arguably the worst character in the series, this guy named Shelly, who's just a big prankster. And he's the guy that eventually Jason gets the mask from. So I guess, he's good for something in that regard. The main final girl here, she's not bad. But everyone else, this has some of the worst acting in the series by far. You have a few okay kills here, but there's really not much going on there. And they really overdo the 3D gimmick in this one. They are trying every which way to be like, hey, 3D, look out, 3D, 3D, 3D. And it's like, okay, guys, we get it. This movie's in 3D. You don't need to throw any more popcorn or juggle any balls in my face anymore, because this is getting tiring. I will say this does have one of the better Jasons in the series. I like the actor who plays him here. He does a pretty good job. Not a big fan of the makeup on him, but outside of that, I think the performance is decent. And yeah, like I said, this entry just to me is one of the more forgettable ones. Outside of it being the one where he gets his mask, there's really not a whole lot here that won me over. And yeah, that's why it's down here at the bottom. Moving on to number 8, I have Jason X, the 10th entry in this franchise. Jason X is a very divisive movie in this series. It's meant to be stupid. Like, they clearly knew what they were doing when they made this movie. They meant it to be dumb. They meant it to be over the top. I mean, it's fucking Jason in space. Like, what else would you imagine this to be? With that being said, this movie is incredibly stupid. And again, it's meant to be, but I always kind of go back and forth on this entry. There's things about it I like. There's things about it I really don't like. But at the end of the day, it is entertaining enough. There are some actual really good kills here. I like the look of Uber Jason once he gets his transformation toward the end of the movie. You have a couple of funny kind of side characters in the movie that are doing a few things here and there. But for the most part, again, this is another entry that just doesn't really do a whole lot for me. I know it's got a huge fan base, and then I know on the other end there's a huge part of the fan base that really hates this movie. Me, I actually fall kind of in the middle. I'm pretty indifferent on this one. When I do rewatches and watch this series in its entirety, it's one I usually look forward to because, like I said, it's got enough to entertain me. But all in all, there's enough bad to kind of keep it from being all that good and higher up on my list for me personally. At number 7, I have Freddy vs. Jason. This was the 11th entry in the series, and this is finally when we got the chance to see Jason go up against Freddy Krueger. And for the most part, kind of like Jason X, it ends up being a pretty entertaining movie. Again, it's very dumb, very stupid. The characters in it are absolute idiots. But for the most part, there's some interesting things that I think the movie does well. I like Freddy Krueger going up against Jason. I think there's some good dynamics there. I don't like the fact that they recast Jason and didn't use Kane Hodder, but I think Ken Kirzinger does a good job in the role. Overall, like I said, there's aspects of this I do like. There are some pretty good kills. A little bit too heavy on the CG. This is, early 2000s, so we're starting to get into that real CGI heavy stuff in horror movies. So there's a bit of that I'm not a big fan of. Like I said, the characters here are pretty much non-existent. You could really care less about them. The only other thing that I'm not a huge fan of is the route they go with Jason, where they make him afraid of water, all because of, how he drowned in the original movie or whatever. It just seems very weird for him to be so afraid of water that he doesn't want to even go near it, or if it touches him, he basically loses all of his abilities, even though in other entries we've clearly seen him in water and he did just fine. So there might be a little bit of retconning here. Who knows if this movie's supposed to be canon when it comes into consideration with the rest of the series. But all in all, there are some fun moments here. Like I said, I like the dynamic between the two main villains. But outside of them, you're not really getting a whole lot else from the other characters, which I think it focuses way too much attention on the kids in this movie versus the two people that everybody came to see the movie for. Now, moving on to number 6, I have Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. This is another one. This is kind of a perfect middle of the pack movie for me in this series. This is one that doesn't have a whole lot going for it, but honestly, the last 20 minutes of this movie are why you see this movie. This was originally the setup that they wanted to be Freddy versus Jason, and when that kind of fell out, they ended up going, hey, let's still have Jason versus somebody, and in this case, it ends up being Jason versus Carrie. We get a psychic that goes up against him, and I actually like that dynamic. Granted, it doesn't really come into play until, like I said, basically the last 20 minutes of this movie is a big battle between the main character and Jason, and all that stuff's cool. Everything leading up to it, kind of not all that great. Unfortunately, this is one of the movies that definitely got hit by the MPAA. A lot of stuff had to be cut out, so a lot of the kills are edited in certain ways where you can't really see a whole lot, and unfortunately that does hinder the movie a little bit. Keeps it from being a little better because, these movies are all about the kills and the gore and everything, and once you edit that out and take away some of that, it kind of takes away the effect that it has on the movie. Outside of that, though, there are a couple of okay characters in this movie. I like the main girl, Tina. She, the actress that plays her, does a pretty good job, and even the main guy that's kind of her love interest, I thought isn't too bad. outside of them, it's pretty much just, another bunch of dead meats. But for the most part, they're not as annoying as some of the characters in the movies I've already talked about. So that's a plus there. But all in all, this is a pretty enjoyable movie in the series. Not one of the best, but definitely not one of the worst. All right, now getting into the top 5, this might be another controversial pick in my lineup here. At number 5, I have the original Friday the 13th. I'm not crazy about the original. I do like it. I do like what it sets up for this franchise and everything. But to me, it's not one of the best in the series. It's a perfect middle of the pack movie. It sets up some nice stuff. The atmosphere in the movie is really good. I do like the inevitable reveal of Mrs. Voorhees as the killer. I like the fact that we don't see her throughout the entire movie. It almost uses kind of the Jaws approach where, we have the point of view from her throughout the movie as you see her killing people and whatnot. But you never know who she is or what she looks like or anything like that until she's revealed at the end. And I actually kind of like that aspect of the movie. And Betsy Palmer as Mrs. Voorhees is fantastic. She does a great job. The main final girl here, I believe her name's Alice. The actress playing her is one of the best final girls in this entire series. So the in-fight sequence between them two is really great. You do have a few other characters that are decent. This is the first movie of Kevin Bacon's career, so, it has that going for it as well. The kills are a little tamer here, but again, this is the beginning of the series. So, they didn't know quite what they were going to be getting into at the beginning. But the effects, considering the age of this one versus some of the other ones, actually look really good. Tom Savini did all the effects and all the makeup and everything, and it all looks fantastic. So while this isn't one of my favorites in the series, it is a solid entry, and it fits perfectly at the number 5 spot. Now, moving on to number 4, I have Friday the 13th, Part 2. This is the introduction of adult Jason. And I think it works pretty well for the most part. In this one, we get another good final girl. Can't quite remember the character's name, but I think she does a good job here. Jason, the introduction of him is great. This is the one where he's wearing the potato sack on his head. Not a big fan of that, so I do like when he eventually gets the hockey mask. But I like this one overall. I like what it kind of establishes, going from the first movie to this one. It is basically just kind of a retread of the first movie, except now you have a different killer at the forefront. But all in all, this one has some okay characters. There's some good death sequences, especially like the kid that is in the wheelchair that gets hit and falls down the flight of stairs. One of my favorite kills in the series. Absolutely hilarious. But I think the actor that get to play Jason, I think he's doing a good job here. I'm not crazy about Hillbilly Jason versus later on when we get like zombie undead Jason. But in this one, it works more for me than it does in Part 3. And overall, I think this one is it's just a solid entry. There's nothing overly great about it, but there's nothing really bad here that's bogging it down either. It doesn't feel quite as boring as Part 3. There's enough here that's kind of moving the story along a little bit more. Overall, I think it's a pretty solid entry in the series, and that's why I've got it at number 4. All right, now getting into the top 3. The top 3 is without question very definitive for me. Some of the other ones in this list are somewhat interchangeable, but my top 3 is pretty set in stone. And at number 3, I have the 2009 remake, Friday the 13th. Now, again, this might be another controversial pick, but I really love the remake. I think the remake, honestly, it could possibly be my favorite, but I have it at number 3 because I think the other two that I have above it do some things better, just overall wise from a technical standpoint, and they do some things with certain characters and whatnot that I really like. But with this remake, I think it's very solid. It's arguably one of the best horror remakes from the 2000s. That was the era we had so many remakes of movies from the 70s and the 80s and whatnot. And I thought this was one of the better ones. I love the fake out at the beginning of, hey, these are the kids we're going to be following the entire movie. Oh, wait, we're going to kill them off in the first 25 minutes. And boom, we have a 25-minute cold opening. Who does that? especially in a horror movie. That's insane to not even get your title card until 25 minutes into the movie. That's absolutely insane. But once we get to the kids that we're going to be following from the rest of the movie, there's a few of them I actually like. Jared Padalecki, who I'm not a huge fan of, I think actually does a pretty good job here. And then I think it's Danielle Panabaker, who is one of the main actresses. Again, someone I'm not a huge fan of, but I think she does a really good job here. You have the characters of Chewie and Lawrence providing some good comic relief. I like their whole dynamic. This one has some really intense kills. The gore is absolutely insane. Some of the best kills in the series, honestly. Like the sleeping bag over the fire. That one is intense. The douchebag that gets killed at the end when he gets put on the tow truck. Absolutely awesome. The fire poker through the eye, through the door of the police officer. That one's great. So this has a lot going for it. The guy that plays Jason here, Derek Mears, I think does a really good job. And I like what they kind of set up with Jason in this movie. They explain certain things throughout this movie that, in other entries in the series, it's like, well, how does Jason get from point A to point B so quickly? They explain that he digs these underground tunnels, and that's how he's able to get through the campsite so quickly. I like that aspect. And I like that this movie takes what was good about the first 4 entries in the series and kind of ties them all together in one nice little package. So that's why I have it at number 3. And if you haven't seen the remake or you haven't seen it in a while, definitely revisit it because it is actually one of the best movies in the series by far. All right, now getting into the top 2. At number 2, I have Friday the 13th, Part 4, the final chapter. This is the introduction of Tommy Jarvis. And this is, without question, just one of the best movies in the series by far. It does so many things right. It introduces a cast of characters who, for the most part, are kind of throwaway characters, but you get some nice gems out of there. Corey Feldman as Tommy Jarvis is great. His sister and mother, who he lives with, the actresses playing them, both do really good jobs. The kids that inevitably come in and are all the dead meats. There's a couple of them that are decent. You have Crispin Glover, who is amazing in this movie. His little dance sequence in the middle is hilarious and so off the wall, batshit crazy. I don't even know how to explain it. And his death sequence, yelling for where the hell the corkscrew is, absolutely amazing. One of my favorite deaths in the series. But this is one that just does, like I said, a lot of things right. The Jason here, the actor who plays him, does a really good job. The effects and makeup on his face once he's revealed, when Corey Feldman, stabs him with the machete at the end, all of that stuff looks so good. And this is a really good kind of starring vehicle for Corey Feldman. He was very young in this movie, but I think he does a really good job. And honestly, I would have loved to seen him return in this series. I know he comes back in a dream sequence in Part 5, but I would have loved to seen him continue on to be Tommy Jarvis instead of him being recast. But all in all, very strong output from this movie, and it is without question one of the best in the series. And coming in at number 1, my personal favorite, Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. This is the movie in the series that is almost essentially a meta comedy. This kind of set the standard before Scream and even before Wes Craven's New Nightmare of a horror movie where the characters knew about other horror movies. Because a lot of the time, the characters had no idea what's going on. But when this movie starts out, you get a couple and they make it very well known that they know what horror movies are right off the bat. And that was something at the time you didn't really see in the genre. And it's cool to see a Friday the 13th movie kind of set up that precedent. And I think it does a really good job balancing the comedy and the horror here, because outside of it being genuinely pretty funny in parts, I think this has one of the better Jasons, just the way that he looks. This is when we get the introduction of zombie Jason, because now we're back to it actually being Jason instead of Roy, the paramedic. You have a different actor here playing Tommy Jarvis, but this guy I think does better than the guy in Part 5. And this one actually has a group of kids that are all, for the most part, decent. They're not all that annoying compared to some of the other kids in the entries. of this series. So when some of them eventually get killed off, you actually kind of care about them. And this is one of the few in the series where you actually have the little kids coming into camp and them actually being put in the way of possibly being killed by Jason. So there's actually some pretty horrific parts there, wondering if Jason's actually going to kill these kids. And then there's actually some good comic relief there as well. Once they inevitably think they're going to die by the hand of Jason, a couple of the kids make some pretty good jokes. And all in all, it's just, like I said, it's a good balance of the comedy and the horror. And this one is just a fun entry that, like Part 7, unfortunately got edited down quite a bit. So some of the kills do get, you don't get to see quite everything. So there is a little bit less gore and blood and things like that. But the kills themselves do still work. And overall, this is, without a doubt, my favorite in the series. That's about it from me, guys. I hope you enjoy your Friday the 13th. If you have seen the movies in this series, please let me know what you think about it. Let me know your favorites. If you want to rank them, give me your breakdown and let me know which ones are your favorites and which ones are your least favorites. I will leave all my links down below on where you can follow me and check out more of my reviews and rankings. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more future reviews and rankings. And until next time, guys, I will catch you all later.